the silent playground. It started on a crisp autumn evening when Vanessa took her younger brother, Jason, to the neighborhood playground. The setting sun painted the sky in streaks of orange and purple, and the air carried the scent of dry leaves. Vanessa, a college freshman home for the weekend, thought some fresh air would do Jason good after his week of being cooped up with a cold. The playground was oddly empty. A single swing creaked in the breeze, its chain grinding against the metal frame. Jason, excited to be outside, bolted toward the slides while Vanessa settled on a bench, scrolling through her phone. Minutes later, Jason's laughter stopped abruptly. Vanessa looked up to find him standing still, staring at the merry-go-round. The contraption was spinning slowly, even though no one was near it. "Jason, don't just stand there. Go play," Vanessa called out. "There's someone on it," Jason replied without turning around. Vanessa squinted but saw nothing unusual. "No, there isn't. It's just the wind." "No, it's a girl," Jason insisted, his voice trembling slightly. Vanessa walked over, her sneakers crunching on the gravel. As she approached the merry-go-round, the spinning slowed, and it eventually stopped. She crouched beside Jason. "See? No one's here." Jason's eyes darted around nervously. "She was there. She smiled at me." Vanessa's skin prickled. "You're probably imagining things. Let's go back to the swings." Jason reluctantly followed her. He stayed close, his usual enthusiasm subdued. Vanessa tried to shake off her unease, but the silence of the playground felt heavy, almost oppressive. As Jason climbed onto the swing, Vanessa noticed something strange. The shadows cast by the equipment didn't align with the fading sunlight. They stretched and twisted unnaturally, as if they had a will of their own. Then came the giggle, a high-pitched, childlike sound that didn't belong to Jason. Vanessa spun around, her heart pounding. No one was there. "Did you hear that?" she asked Jason. He nodded, his face pale. "She's back." Before Vanessa could respond, the merry-go-round started spinning again. This time, it moved faster, the creaking sound growing louder and more erratic. Vanessa grabbed Jason's hand and backed away. "We're leaving," she said firmly. Jason didn't argue. As they hurried toward the exit, the laughter grew louder, echoing through the empty playground. Vanessa glanced back and froze. A small figure stood near the merry-go-round, partially obscured by the shadows. The figure's face was pale, its eyes dark voids that seemed to absorb the light around them. It raised a hand and waved slowly. Vanessa tightened her grip on Jason and broke into a sprint. They didn't stop running until they reached their house. Slamming the door behind them, Vanessa locked it and pulled the curtains shut. Jason burst into tears. "She followed us," he whispered. Vanessa's blood ran cold. "What do you mean?" Jason pointed to the living room window. Vanessa hesitated before peeking through the curtain. The street was empty, but the swing in their front yard was moving back and forth, creaking softly in the still night air. The Watcher in the Woods. It was supposed to be a quick weekend getaway for Alex, Maya, and their friends. The idea of camping deep in the woods, far away from the city, seemed like the perfect escape. They pitched their tents in a small clearing surrounded by towering pine trees. The only sounds were the rustling leaves and the occasional chirp of crickets. The first night was uneventful, filled with laughter, roasted marshmallows, and ghost stories. But as the second night fell, an eerie stillness descended upon the forest. The usual symphony of nocturnal creatures was conspicuously absent. "It's too quiet," Maya said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Maybe we scared off the animals with all our noise," Alex suggested, though his tone lacked conviction. As the group settled around the campfire, they heard it, a faint rustling sound coming from the trees. At first, they dismissed it as the wind, but the noise grew louder, more deliberate. Twigs snapped underfoot, as if someone, or something, was circling their campsite. "Who's there?" Alex called out, standing and shining his flashlight toward the woods. The beam of light illuminated nothing but trees and shadows. Maya clutched her jacket tightly. "Let's just go back to the tents." Reluctantly, the group agreed. They doused the fire and retreated to their tents. But sleep didn't come easily. Every so often, they'd hear the faint sound of footsteps, followed by a low, guttural hum that seemed to vibrate through the ground. In the dead of night, Alex awoke to the sound of Maya's scream. He bolted out of his tent to find her standing in the clearing, her flashlight trembling in her hand. "There's someone out there," she stammered. The others emerged, their faces pale with fear. Alex scanned the tree line and froze. A figure stood just beyond the edge of the clearing. It was tall and thin, its limbs unnaturally elongated. Its face was obscured by shadow, but its glowing eyes pierced through the darkness. The group huddled together, their flashlights aimed at the figure. It didn't move, but the oppressive sense of being watched grew stronger. Then, without warning, the figure raised a hand and pointed directly at them. Panic set in. "Run!" Alex shouted. The group scattered, each person fleeing in a different direction. The forest seemed to close in around them, the trees twisting and contorting as if trying to trap them. Maya's screams echoed through the woods, followed by an unnatural silence. One by one, the friends' voices faded until Alex was the only one left. He stumbled into another clearing, his breath ragged. The figure stood there, waiting, took a step forward, and Alex finally saw its face. Or rather, the lack of one. Its features were smooth and blank, yet it seemed to grin. The last thing Alex heard was the guttural hum, now deafening, as the world went black. The shadow beneath. Dylan had always loved swimming. Growing up in a small coastal town, he spent most of his childhood exploring the ocean, diving off rocky cliffs, and racing his friends through the waves. When he moved to the city for college, he sought out a public pool to maintain his routine. The Olympic-sized pool at Crestview Aquatic Center became his sanctuary, a place to clear his mind and push his limits. On one particular evening, Dylan arrived late, hoping to avoid the usual crowd. The lifeguard on duty, a bored teenager, waved him in with barely a glance. The fluorescent lights reflected off the still water, casting an eerie glow across the empty facility. Dylan changed quickly and dove in. The cold water jolted his senses, and he relished the solitude. Lap after lap, he swam with mechanical precision, the rhythmic sound of his strokes and breathing his only company. But as he approached the deep end, something felt off. The water seemed darker, murkier, despite the pristine cleanliness of the pool. He stopped mid-lap and treaded water, peering down into the depths. A shadow lingered at the bottom, shifting slightly as though alive. Probably a trick of the lights, he muttered to himself, shaking off the unease. He resumed swimming, but the feeling persisted. Each time he passed over the deep end, he could sense it, something lurking just out of sight. During a backstroke, he glanced up and noticed the lifeguard's chair was empty. "Great," Dylan grumbled, annoyed at the lack of supervision. He decided to finish one more lap before calling it a night. As he reached the deep end again, his foot brushed against something. He froze, heart pounding. It wasn't the smooth tile of the pool floor, but something soft, almost fleshy. Panicking, he kicked away and surfaced, gasping for air. The water beneath him began to ripple unnaturally, as though something massive was moving below. Dylan scrambled for the edge, but before he could reach it, an icy hand shot out of the water and grabbed his ankle. He screamed, thrashing wildly, but the grip was unrelenting. He was yanked underwater, the chlorinated liquid burning his eyes as he struggled to see his attacker. What he saw made his blood run cold. A face stared back at him, pale and distorted, its mouth wide in a silent scream. Its eyes were hollow voids, and its skin appeared to be peeling away, revealing dark muscle and bone underneath. Around it, shadows writhed like living entities, dragging him deeper into the abyss. Summoning every ounce of strength, Dylan kicked free and shot to the surface, coughing and gasping. He clawed his way out of the pool and collapsed on the wet tiles. The water behind him was calm again, as though nothing had happened. Shaking, he glanced back at the deep end. The shadow was gone. But as he grabbed his towel and turned to leave, he heard a splash. Looking over his shoulder, he saw a single wet footprint forming on the tiles, followed by another and another heading straight for him. The disappearing road. Late one summer night, James was driving home after visiting his parents in a rural part of the state. The 2-hour drive usually felt peaceful, the open road and starlit sky offering a quiet escape from the city's chaos. But this night was different. The usual landmarks, barns, road signs, and distant hills were missing. The moonlit fields seemed to stretch endlessly into the darkness, and the narrow road twisted and turned in unfamiliar ways. James dismissed it as his tired mind playing tricks on him. He hadn't slept well the night before, and maybe he'd taken a wrong turn somewhere. He reached for his GPS, but it showed nothing but a blank screen, as if it couldn't detect his location. Even his phone had no signal. Anxiety prickled at the edges of his mind, but he pressed on. "The road has to lead somewhere," he muttered. As the miles ticked by, the road narrowed, the asphalt cracking and crumbling into gravel. His headlights illuminated a wooden sign with faded, barely legible letters. "Morrow Road. Proceed with caution." James frowned. He had never heard of Morrow Road before, but it wasn't like he had any better options. He turned onto the path, his tires crunching over the loose gravel. The trees on either side grew denser, their gnarled branches forming a canopy that blocked out the sky. His headlights cast long, flickering shadows that danced eerily along the road. A movement caught his eye. A figure darted across the road up ahead, vanishing into the underbrush. James slammed on the brakes, his heart pounding. He scanned the area but saw nothing. "Probably a deer," he said aloud, though the unease in his chest told him otherwise. He continued driving, but the feeling of being watched grew stronger. Every so often, he'd catch glimpses of movement in the trees. A flash of white, the rustle of leaves. The road seemed endless, looping back on itself no matter how far he drove. Then he saw it, a house. It was small and weathered, its windows dark and its roof sagging. A single porch light flickered like a dying ember. Relief washed over James. Maybe someone here could give him directions. He parked in the dirt driveway and approached the house, the gravel crunching loudly under his boots. As he knocked on the door, it swung open with a low creak. "Hello," he called out, stepping cautiously inside. The air was thick with the scent of mildew and something metallic. The walls were lined with faded photographs of people he didn't recognize, their faces oddly blurred, as if the images had been tampered with. James froze when he noticed a mirror hanging on the far wall. In its reflection, he could see the room behind him, but it didn't match reality. In the mirror, the house was pristine, the furniture polished and the walls painted a warm yellow. But what sent a chill down his spine was the figure standing behind him in the reflection. A woman in a long white dress, her head tilted unnaturally to one side. He spun around, but the room was empty. The mirror, however, now showed his own reflection, staring back at him with a wide, unnerving grin he wasn't making. Panicking, James bolted for the door, but the house seemed to twist and shift around him. Hallways appeared where there hadn't been any, and the front door was nowhere to be found. He ran blindly, his footsteps echoing in the oppressive silence. Finally, he burst through a side door and into the open air. Gasping, he sprinted back to his car and jumped in, locking the doors. The engine sputtered to life and he floored the accelerator. As he sped down the road, he glanced in the rearview mirror. The house was gone, replaced by an empty field. But he wasn't alone. The woman in the white dress sat in his back seat, her lifeless eyes meeting his in the mirror. The car skidded off the road and came to a stop in a ditch. When authorities found it the next morning, James was nowhere to be seen. The only clue was a single, faint set of footprints leading back toward Morrow Road.